May I introduce Judge Mitchell, who will be the master of ceremonies for the evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please rise and remain standing for an invocation to be delivered by the Reverend Monsignor Adam J. Kostick. God our Father, we ask you to bless all these men and women representing the law, which is a reflection of your control of our universe. We ask you to bless Judge Cahoon and his family. We ask you to bless those who prepare this food and serve it, and bless all who are able to carry on this work that is so important in the world. We ask all of this through your power. Amen. Thank you, sir. I would now like to present the Honorable J. Joseph Curran, Jr., Lieutenant Governor of the State of Maryland. At the suggestion of Judge McCall, yes, you may sit down. First time I ever had a chance to do that. I'm delighted to have a chance to stop over this evening for the entire festive occasion. The governor had a commitment tonight, and for that reason only, Judge Cahoon, is he not able to stop by and express, on behalf of all citizens, our congratulations, our belief that the bench is strong and getting stronger all the time, and we are certainly going to miss you. As chairman of the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee, I well remember the occasions when you visited our committee room and very articulated and persuasively talked about the need for increases in judicial manpower in Montgomery County, and I know for a fact we always acceded to your request, but you were pretty sure, I know darn well we did. And I just want to stop over from a personal note. I wish you well in your years ahead of you. You've had many years behind you, but I know that there are many ahead of you. The governor asked me, however, to leave with you tonight before I leave a certificate from him, attested to by Lorraine Sheehan, making certain that this certificate of distinguished citizenship is conveyed to you tonight, and it's done out of affection because of your distinguished service and career as a circuit administrative judge and a genuinely good person. I'm delighted to be here, and I want to leave this with you and tell you, Harry, we're sorry you couldn't be here tonight. There will be no further opening remarks, folks. I'm sure you're hungry, so let's eat, and then we can talk a little bit later. Hey, Joe. Last time we were there, dinner with Williams. Oh, good. That'd be funny. You must be. I didn't read a thing about that. The guy appears to be making it looks like it.
Huh? I'm looking for ladies. I didn't know. Looking and I don't see them. I know he doesn't have a fundraiser tonight. And he's got a docket tomorrow morning. At 1 o'clock claiming that. That's why I filed it. And I can look at it. Okay.
Dessert is being served. I'd like to present the head table to you. To my far left, Dirk Thompson, immediate past president of the Montgomery County Bar Association. To my immediate far right, Monsignor Kostick, whom you heard from already. To my left again, John O'Neill, who is the program chairman of this affair. To my immediate right, at the far end, my good friend, the Honorable John F. McAuliffe, the Court of Appeals. Next to my left, the Honorable Charles Gilchrist, the County Executive for Montgomery County. To my right again, Ms. Dee Hawkins,
Judge Cahoon's daughter. Again, to my left, the Honorable Rosalind Bell, Court of Special Appeals. To my right again, our hero, Dave Cahoon. To my left again, the Honorable Robert C. Murphy of the Maryland Court of Appeals. Again to my right, Tom Craven, President of the Montgomery County Bar Association. And to my immediate left again, my administrative judge, Duane Mitchell. Enjoy your dessert and we'll get this thing rolling. I'll get silence in here in a minute. Folks, ladies and gentlemen, if you could be kind enough to give me your attention for a moment. The Bar Association will probably have to start paying time and a half for this place in another hour, so we want to roll things for you. I am very pleased to be serving as your Master of Ceremony tonight, albeit not a Rodney Dangerfield or a Bob Sweeney or someone of that ilk. It is an evening of mixed emotions, I think, for all of us. We envy David in his newfound non-occupation, and we envy him for that, but again we regret to see his departure. I can assure you all of our colleagues feel deeply about this. We hate to see him leave and we wish he'd change his mind. With that, I will proceed to introduce a former colleague who would be Chief Judge now if he had stayed, but he chose to join Murphy's Mafia in Annapolis. My dear friend who's had every experience in the world. He's driven a Harley Davidson, he's flown an airplane. He's got about a 55 Ford Fairlane I see every now and again that his wife lets him drive. He's just a great guy who has known Dave for a long time, and I'd ask Judge John F. McAuliffe of the Court of Appeals to make some remarks.
Judge Mitchell promised me that I could speak after the Chief Judge and therefore not be a dissenting vote. But he's changed the rules of the game, and as the incoming judge in charge of the circuit court, you're entitled to do that. Let me make, I have about 100 pages of notes here.
Jim wrote it.
Jim did. As I guess it was Sir Francis Bacon said, an oft-spoken judge is no well-tuned cymbal. Let me keep that in mind as I begin. I really do welcome the opportunity to say a few words on the occasion of, not the retirement, but the resignation of Judge Cahoon. Because I worked with him in the trial of cases before either of us went on the bench. Dave and I were together. Bob Heaney, actually Bob and Dave and I worked together on several cases in the trial of cases. I worked with him and actually for him for more than 13 years on the circuit bench. And as one of his more contentious and often impetuous charges, I have contributed a few of the gray hairs to Dave, and most certainly on occasion I've tested what has proven to be his enduring patience. He's been a great judge, and I think perhaps more importantly, he has and is a great and a good man. Everyone here, I think, knows of his dedication to his family, his understandable pride in all of them, and clearly, I think, a motivating factor in his decision to change his course at this point in his life is his family and his desire to spend more quality time, if I will, with his wife, with his family. He is dedicated as well to his church, to St. Mary's, and in recognition of the presence of Monsignor Costick, I have cut out all of the jokes I had earlier. He is, in addition, perhaps others will speak of this, but in case they do not, let me say Dave is well known for his contributions to his church, and he is one of the lay leaders of St. Mary's. In addition to that family, Dave's known to us for his dedication to his circuit court family. He has been throughout his tenure as both a circuit judge and then as administrative judge, as chief judge, as whatever circuit administrative judge, whatever titles they give these folks. He has been deeply involved in the personal problems as well as the professional, as the judicial problems of all of the judges who've served in his extended family. And that includes not only the judges, but the secretaries, the clerks, all of the personnel over whom Dave has had a good deal of control and influence in the past few years. I was fortunate in that I already had a big brother on the bench, but now I had another one. Unusual for me to go down to Dave and to take to him a serious problem involving either municipal law, zoning law, anything that had to do with governmental law, in which Dave is an acknowledged expert. And indeed, before him I did this with Joe Mathias, anything that had to do with property law. You can turn to people in the circuit court, and you could turn to Dave as well and draw upon their expertise. And there was never a time when he didn't have the time to share with you all of his rich background in the law. In addition to that, Dave knows the intricacies of government as few other people that I've run into. And I might say that in addition to understanding intricacies of government, and perhaps this goes hand in hand, he knows the vocabulary of the bureaucrat. And that's different. He can interface with the best of them. He knows what the bottom line of a floppy database means. He was never too busy to share this with the rest of us, and I should tell you that Dave was not born, however, an administrative judge. Dave was born 65 years ago, notwithstanding his apparent youth, in Brockton, Massachusetts. And his undergraduate education began in the College of Engineering in the University of Maine back in 1940. But as some of you will recall, this was interrupted because in 1941 Dave went into the Army Air Corps. Now there was such a thing in 1941. He went from August of 1941 until November of 1945 with service in the then Army Air Corps. And most of this time, I think, was spent in the Air Transport Command. Dave was a navigator for the Air Transport Command. He served in a ferry squadron for years and never contracted AIDS, which I think... Dave and his crew ferried aircraft overseas, and Dave was unable to tell me the number of transatlantic flights that he has made. He, very often what they would do is take a new aircraft overseas and then come back with an aircraft being returned to the States for maintenance or whatever, but returning quite often with litter patients. He served all over the world, being in this kind of service, Europe, India, South America, Africa, the Mediterranean area. He flew in B-17s, 24s, 25s, 26s, the C-54 transports that many of you remember, the C-46s, and then one I guess they didn't ever give a number to, Dave, the old Dumbos that were particular favorites. Dave never lost an aircraft, and I guess more importantly, never lost an airport, which for a navigator was extremely important. And many of you will remember they flew in all kinds of weather. And I think significant, and I was a sort of a low-time private pilot of single-engine planes, so I really don't know the sophistication of what Dave did, but I flew by fairly sophisticated electronic navigation, which they did not have in those days. Loran was a sort of a new thing, not very dependable. In Dave's day, when you were a navigator on one of these craft, you flew by what you and I would call a sextant, what they call an octant, because it had two more whatevers. And they took their fixes from the stars and therefore preferred to fly at night because you can only take an accurate fix, apparently, on the sun when it was at high noon. So the stars gave you a fix all night. Got to help you on a cloudy night. And they had to fly on cloudy nights as well as any other time. I think probably the most frequent route that Dave and his crew, and there were only, I guess, pilot, co-pilot, navigator, crew chief. You had a crew of 4. Not always the same, because the guy who was the pilot had to be different depending on whether you were flying 2 or 4 engine aircraft in those days. But the more frequent route that he flew was out of Presque Isle in Maine and going up to Newfoundland and then flying to the Azores and from there to Europe, and more often, at least in the latter part of the war, to Paris. One of his return trips, when he had litter patients on board, proved to be one of the more difficult flights that Dave ever had as a navigator. And this was when they were due to come back again from Paris and flying in reverse this route. The trouble was that from the Azores they could not fly to Newfoundland because of weather, and they had to divert to an unusual route and go, in this case, to Bermuda. The problem with this was they had heavy weather. An earlier crew had attempted to take this particular aircraft out and had returned because they were exceeding fuel consumption that they thought would get them there. They loaded up the plane, they took off, and it was Dave's job as navigator to check fuel consumption, to compare it with the miles that they had traveled, and to decide whether they could make it to Bermuda. And also, incidentally, to find Bermuda. They went out through turbulence, which doesn't help your gasoline consumption. According to his flight rule, the gas consumption was running above average. They reached what's known in pilot's jargon as a point of no return, where you have to decide. You either are consuming too much fuel for the time elapsed and you have to go back, or you can press on. It was marginal, and they decided these guys had been through enough. It was probable, at least, that they could get there and they were going to press on. Well, you can imagine the pressure that this put on the navigator. You had better find a destination that was unfamiliar to you, or else you had the lives of everybody on board that rested upon your judgment. As they got up and as they got through the turbulence, things began to calm out a little bit, and the fuel consumption returned not quite to normal, but near to normal, but then problems developed because daybreak came. And 20%, the last 20% of the flight was in daylight hours, and you cannot, the stars are not visible, the sun's not high enough to draw a bearing on where you are. And while they had a beacon, which gave them direction to Bermuda, they had nothing to tell them how much time was elapsed from point to point. If ever a plane came in with a group of litter patients and a very nervous navigator on a wing of prayer, they did. They landed safely, as you can probably judge from the fact that Dave's here with us today. But there was nothing sloshing in the wing tanks when they landed in Bermuda. I think Dave had probably one other flight that will remain in his mind for an awful long time. He went up with a pilot named Flannery, which Judge Murphy and I can tell you should have been ominous from the beginning. It was heavy weather from takeoff. They climbed out into this garbage. They had icing in the clouds. They reached 9,000 feet, and their aircraft iced. In those days, for combat aircraft, you didn't have de-icing boots and all of the good things they have today. They went into a spin. Flannery tried to recover from the spin. They broke out at 2,000 feet. They broke out, and Flannery recovered, only to find that they were in a valley with ridges on all sides of them. And I want to tell you, Monsignor, that at that time there was more than one prayer offered to the patron saint of all pilots. They came back from that, but when they landed at the runway, an engine fire broke out. And Dave, I suspect you'll recall that as one of the more exciting flights that you had. Dave and his crew, however, were unlike some others that we knew who served in World War II. One of his compatriots on the circuit court, Cal Sanders, was also a navigator. who flew in the Second World War, and Bill Dunphy was a pilot of bombers in the Second World War. Thank God they flew on separate planes, because if any of you ever knew those two together, you will understand that. Both were, however, known for going on oxygen at an elevation of 100 feet. Now, you have to understand, 10,000 feet is normal to go on oxygen. But this group, given the world-class hangover that was prevalent, went on oxygen pretty early. Dave finished his undergraduate work when he came back from the service at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, which may offer you some explanation for his adroitness in diplomacy. He then obtained his law degree at Georgetown University and then practiced law in Montgomery County and politics, Democratic politics, thereafter until his appointment to the Circuit Court in 1971. Dave beat out some pretty heavy competition in 1971, and I'll not say who was there. He's handled a number of interesting cases. I think some of you may remember the Tournament case. It was a fraud case, a fellow who was developing a fictitious subdivision. He got some of Dave's most beneficial sentencing. I think the fellow was probably 65 years of age. Dave gave him 26 years and wished him well. Minovich was a case that Chief may well remember, because I think he was Chief Judge of the Court of Special Appeals at the time, and in 18 Maryland appeals, the Court of Special Appeals took the Minovich case and established procedures that today, or at least until Lieutenant Governor Curran's committee came in, established the procedure in criminal insanity cases. Dave also was involved, many of you will remember, in the monkey case, the National Institute of Health monkeys that were the subject of a search and seizure, private organization doing research. I had some interest in that case because I wrote the search warrant in that case. I've never told the chief, but I'll tell him now that the Scarlet 7 on the Severn probably made a mistake in that case, but that was before I was with him. It was a good search warrant, Chief. Dave had the problem of the owner seeking return of the monkeys under a search warrant law, and probably established the first custody order for monkeys in the history of Montgomery County, but entirely appropriately so. That case, although it got a lot of publicity, was an extremely difficult case for everybody that was involved in it, and I think finally has, only in recent days, gotten what is nearly a satisfactory resolution. Dave had a difficult problem in that case and handled it with his usual adroitness. He, as you know, has been county attorney. He has been county council member, and therefore for a long time did not handle cases involving the county, because so often when you were involved in that case, someone would come and say, here's a memorandum that was issued by Dave Cahoon as county attorney, and this is dispositive of the case, so he couldn't be in those. But there came a time when Dave had to hold against the county in the very important case involving many thousands of dollars of so-called recapture tax money. It was the GE property, as I recall, in Rockville. Dave had no hesitation in holding against the county. The county took that case to the appellate courts, and there argued the legislative intent of council members Potter and Skull. What the county had overlooked, however, is that that was not county legislation, it was state legislation, and it was not what Potter and Skull intended, but what Joe Owens meant. And therefore, the decision went in favor of what Dave Cahoon had held. Dave was subjected to the usual indignities of a trial judge on the circuit court level. I recall quite well when Fathers United, and I'm sure many of you do, had not only caused him a great deal of grief in the church, in the newspapers, but also had picketed Dave's church. And one of the members of Fathers United dressed in a barrel. He apparently had no clothes on, and the whole idea was that Dave had stripped the fathers clean of all of their clothing, and they now had to walk around in a barrel. Dave's response to that kind of criticism was, I think, typical of him. It was first a dignified acceptance of their right to protest what they may have thought was an unjust decision, to picket if that's what they felt was appropriate, and then to accept their invitation, the invitation of Fathers United to meet with their group and to answer their questions, which goes beyond normal courage. He did that, and for 3 hours, Dave answered the questions, any questions that Fathers United could put up. Any of you who know Dave, who have worked with him, whether as a bar association or those of us who've worked with him on the bench, know that he came prepared, that he brought with him all of the facts and all of the figures, and that he had thoroughly researched everything there was to talk about. After 3 hours of giving these people what truly existed in the county in terms of fairness of treatment of both spouses in domestic relations cases, he received a standing ovation from Fathers United. And the guy in the barrel became one of his most ardent supporters. That pretty well personifies, I think, how Dave has handled his circuit court time. Much has been said, and I suspect will be said about his administrative abilities as an administrative judge, and appropriately so. He has been largely responsible for implementing such things as one-day, one-trial jury system in Montgomery County, the electronic recording of cases in the county, data processing, which has kept us up with the modern-day innovations, calendar court motivations, and he has a record of probably more settlements than even some of the head knockers in other parts of the state. He has maintained excellent relationships with the clerk and administrator, Howard Smith, and in short has run, in my judgment at least, a top-notch court, and he's run it beautifully. In conclusion, I would say that Dave might well have expressed the thoughts of a Sir William Osler, who was a distinguished physician and philosopher whom none of you have heard of. But at his farewell dinner, which was in 1905, Sir William said this: "I have had 3 personal ideals. 1, to do the day's work well. The 2nd, to act the golden rule as far as in me lay, toward my professional brethren and toward those committed to my care. And the 3rd has been to cultivate such a measure of equanimity as would enable me to bear success with humility and the affection of my friends without pride." I say to Dave that you've done all of that, and you have our collective and individual gratitude and our best wishes as you move on to your new challenges and hopefully your new rewards. Good luck, Dave.
Now that Judge McAuliffe has used up his allotted 5 minutes, I would like to bring another. I would like to bring another speaker to your attention. His court has faced the question of confrontation many, many times, and the Chief tells a marvelous story about himself some years ago, I believe, in the Court of Special Appeals, possibly the fellow who argued a divorce case in front of your court and wore a leisure suit. You remember those, Lenny. They'll be back. And the chief wrote the majority opinion, and the guy lost the case, and he saw the chief on the street in Baltimore, and he said, "The only reason you ruled against me was because I wore a leisure suit." And in all earnestness, Bob Murphy said, "No, that's not true." And the guy says, "Well, it would be a hell of a better reason than the reasons you gave in that opinion." Without further ado, may I please present to you the Chief Judge of our state, Robert C. Murphy, Maryland Court of Appeals. John, thank you very much. I promise not to take more than 3 times my allotted time. Monsignor Kostick, County Executive Gilchrist, Judge Cahoon, needless to say, the other honorables at the, honorables, I should say, at the head table and in the audience. I want to say at the outset, by way of apology, I would have worn a tuxedo tonight, but frankly I saw an opportunity to rent it to John McAuliffe up till midnight. So I get to get it back before I leave here. But we're talking about heroes a minute ago. One of my great heroes is one of this generation's great thinkers, J. Cuthbert Wells, who said, if you have anything of importance to say, for God's sakes, begin at the end. So, in view of the time limitations, I think I will begin at the end and say that the departure from our judicial ranks of Dave Cahoon after almost 15 years of most distinguished judicial service is especially painful to us all, for Dave has been among the state's finest judges from the time of his appointment in 1971. I think there's total unanimity. This is unusual among judges and lawyers, but not so in Dave's case. Total unanimity, not just in Montgomery County, but across the state, that Dave truly epitomizes the very, very best that the judiciary has to offer to the people of our state. I think, Dave, if we had a Hall of Fame, you'd get there on the first vote. We'll establish one of these days. But you know, I understood, and this may be wrong. I guess I first met Dave when he was county attorney. I knew how strong he was in the governmental field. He had a minimal practice, I'm told, in the criminal field. wasn't too strong on criminal procedure. And when he came on the bench, the first case he had, I think it was Bill Rowan was defending some fella, and he promptly made a motion that the indictment be dismissed. Well, Dave kind of looked at him with his beady eyes there, and he thought about that, and he said, "Is there a second?" Well, I'm told that Bill kind of nudged the defendant. Is there a second? And then Dave called for the vote. Needless to say, it was 2-1. But he since learned that that's not the way it was done. But over the years, I might say I have received numerous letters from litigants who have appeared before Judge Cahoon, expressing, as you may expect, the most favorable impression of his vast talents. Among my favorites was one it was very scribbled, very difficult to read, but in it, the thrust of it was that Dave Cahoon was by far the best judge in the state of Maryland. Matter of fact, according to the letter, he was the only judge. We didn't need any other except Dave Cahoon. And then at the bottom there's a little P.S. And it said, "Please excuse the crayon, but they won't let me have anything sharp in here." You know, when you become a judge, they say that you have to make a selection between two choices, really. You must choose between honest arrogance or hypocritical humility. Dave really chose neither of those. He came up with a species all of his own. His style simply is, and if I had to characterize it, one of quiet, steady effectiveness over the long haul. He wears well, as you all know, in this county. You know, in the judiciary, unlike other areas of government, we don't give away any pins or any plaques. When your time is up, we just kind of say, "There's the door, and out you go." But when we want to say something good about a judge, we say he was a fair-minded, good judge, period. We're not given overly to adjectives, but in Dave's case, I think it was the great Dizzy Dean who once said this, and I think it's apropos of what we're all here for tonight, to honor Dave Cahoon. Dizzy Dean once said, "It ain't bragging if you really done it." And I think Dave has done it. He's really done it. He's done it like few judges in the history of this state have done it. He retires to a very, very grateful populace in this county as well as outside of this county. He's earned his Ph.D. over and over again in judicial administration. He'll be the new Roscoe Pound of Maryland, and we just hate to see him go. It's tough to see the old veterans leave before they really have to. And Dave, we all wish you the greatest of luck. It's a great joy for me to come into this county. You do things over here so very, very right. You have a higher order somehow or other here than in other areas. And it's just a pleasure for me to be here and to express my own feelings about Dave and his performance over the years. Thank you.
The next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is the County Executive of Montgomery County, Mr. Charles W. Gilchrist, who is a colleague at the bar, specialized in tax matters for many years, and has decided upon leaving office to seek ordination in the Episcopalian ministry. He's not going back to tax law because he probably has read about the Graham-Rudman editions. He is a good friend of the bar. He's a good friend of the judiciary. He's a good friend of all the people in Montgomery County. Please welcome our county executive, Mr. Charles W. Gilchrist.
Thank you very much, Judge Murphy. You know, it is a real pleasure for me to have the opportunity to speak on a platform with two judges, and I'd like to take this opportunity to go over the DeGrazia case again with Judge Murphy. Took a little bit too long to resolve that, but I will leave that to a more learned period of time when we can discuss the pros and cons of my experience before the courts of Maryland in that outstanding case. It is true that I am a lawyer, and I have always regretted that I wasn't able to spend time practicing either before Judge Cahoon or with Judge Cahoon. I was more interested in putting shoes on the feet of my children and feeding them and having them survive than I was meeting that marvelous opportunity. More seriously, I have had a great deal of pleasure in working with Judge Cahoon in his position as the administrative judge of our court. I have not had many opportunities to meet with him even in that capacity. I've had several lunches with him, and I'd just like to say that the taxpayers of the county are very fortunate that I only had several, because each one of them cost them millions of dollars. Judge Cahoon is a very effective person at a lunch table in his low-key way. He has a good loosening up procedure. He has Howard Smith call you on the phone in the first go-round, and then by the time you're through, you're glad either to write a check to him or to move some county agency out of the courthouse so he can put smoking lounge in the room that is being vacated, or some other move of that kind. I hate to disclose these secrets of his effectiveness because Rosalie Riley hasn't learned it yet. She has, after about 6 years in office, finally achieved getting a few room dividers in her office, and that's taken her over a year. But I'm sure that if Judge Cahoon has the time, he will tell her how to be more effective in lobbying the county government. I noticed that we learned a great deal about Judge Cahoon's bravery in the air during the war. There was a period of time that was passed over rather quickly by both of the judges, and I can understand that we want to preserve reputations here and we don't want to drag out dirty linen, but it is a fact that Judge Cahoon served on our county council. Now, I know we don't want to talk about these things, and I can understand why. I had to leave an hour or so this night to go down and talk to the county council and explain to them that we would be back before these excellent judges if they take the wrong step. But it is a fact that Judge Cahoon was an outstanding member of our Montgomery County Council. And I think he set a tone at a time when this county
was beginning to change, and I think for the better, to an urban community. It is it was a time at which I think many decisions were made with tremendous courage, and the political price was paid for Judge Cahoon and others for having had the integrity at that time to set a tone for the planning efforts of this county, which I think has emerged as certainly the goal and commitment that we all have. And I think we should not forget his outstanding service in that capacity. We still do read his decisions as county attorney. Paul McGuckian frequently cites him with respect to important issues that come up in the conduct of our business from day to day, and he was indeed an outstanding of a list of many fine county attorneys for this great county. I have had a tremendous honor and pleasure in observing his work as the administrative judge since 1975, and to have appreciated his judicial career before that. I know that the one-day, one-trial step means a lot to the bar, but I can tell you to the citizens of this county, it is truly a marvel of the way the judicial system should work. I think it is perhaps the best single ad in favor of Montgomery County that we have. There is, I can assure you, nothing that takes place in this county that is more effective, and I recognize the contribution, of course, of the clerks and the rest of the personnel in our great courthouse to that, but there is nothing that contributes more to the good feeling that people have about their county than the one-day, one-trial process. The streamlined reporting was one of the lunches we had, and we had to pay for that. I think it is worth the cost. I think, in fact, it has saved our taxpayers a tremendous amount of money, but the electronic streamlined reporting system that Judge Cahoon had sponsored was, I think, a marvelous step forward. And he has, of course, surpassed all of these technical and administrative contributions, important as they are, by the ability to establish the reputation of a fair and talented jurist who is respected by everyone who has come before him or who has heard about his decisions on the court. And finally, I have seen a great many people come and go in Montgomery County, and from my position, it seems to me that there are a few individuals whose contribution goes far beyond the specific achievements that may be credited to them. Dave Cahoon is one of those rare individuals, and you very rarely see them among people who are in elected office for a long time, but people who set the tone that enhances an entire community and gives people a feeling that integrity and understanding and compassion prevail even beyond those individual decisions that go into making a career. He has a sense of humor and proportion, which I think is too often missing in this very intense community. He has, as has already been pointed out, a commitment to the lasting values of our society and its institutions and the spiritual welfare of our country and our community that is difficult to match and will not easily be forgotten. And I think, above all, at a time when it is somewhat rare, he has set forth as a tremendous asset and a fundamental belief and contribution that quality of civility that makes a community like this have some chance of succeeding and of solving its problems in the spirit to which we all ought to be committed. It has been a pleasure for me to know of Judge Cahoon, to have worked with him, and I look forward to many, many years of happy association hereafter. Thank you very much. Invite you guys up. No bumper stickers or pins. Okay. May it please the various courts, I'd like to have Chairman Joe Owens and Delegate Helen Koss and Delegate Jerry Hyatt join me up here. Chairman Levitan had to leave. I feel honored to be here to make the presentation. Is Jerry still here? No, Jerry had to leave. Jerry is vice chairman of the delegation for 3 years that I served in Annapolis, my first term. Chairman Owens was chairman of the judiciary. Chairman Koss is the chairman of my committee and Constitutional Administrative Law Committee. You wonder why I get to make the presentation. Well, 1986 is an election year, and Judge Cahoon is my constituent. So we decided that was only fair, seeing how we are in District 17, that on behalf of the state senators and the state delegates and the state delegation, which really was right in my first contact with Judge Cahoon when he was county attorney, and I was a student at Towson, and he was coming before the delegation at that time. We'd like to make a presentation to you as a small token of our appreciation of all your years of public service. We have a flag here that has flown over the State House, which we'd like to present to you this time. Good luck to you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I guess we could give Judges Beard, McKenna, and Massetti equal time. This is a political night, but we won't do it tonight. The next speaker is the newly crowned president of the Montgomery County Bar Association, Thomas L. Craven, who has some remarks and a presentation to make to Judge Cahoon.
At the coronation of our honoree, or immediately preceding it, I was a young lawyer, or a lot younger than I am now, but I sensed within the Bar Association and among lawyers in general some trepidation at that time. I think it's fair to say that, as is usually the case, the appointment was not by acclamation. I think the governor knew something that many of the lawyers and the rest of us in this state and this county most particularly did not. And I think that's being emphasized tonight because, as far as I can recall, this is the only time in those years that an event of this sort has been officially sponsored by the Bar Association. I think that's because this man is a man of the talents that have been described to you more eloquently earlier this evening. And I don't need to repeat his accomplishments as administrative judge. I think that even the calendar call, most lawyers will grudgingly admit, has served to advance justice and to move the cases through the court. But it's not solely as an administrator that we will remember Judge Cahoon. We found from the very beginning, after those initial periods of uncertainty preceding his appointment, that he was a fair, a firm, and a right judge. He was unusually eager to listen to those, even those much junior to him in experience and wisdom. I recall, as a young prosecutor with very little, if any, more experience in criminal law than the then newly sworn-in judge. And I was involved in a case which had that archaic subject, that of a charge against the perpetrators of being rogues and vagabonds. And those rogues and vagabonds were eventually, notwithstanding my stumbling around, convicted. And I appeared at a sentencing eventually. And after the sentencing, I was walking down the hall, not entirely smug, but satisfied that they had been dealt with fairly and that the state had been dealt with fairly and that the sentence had been appropriate. And it's not like this courthouse we have now. Lawyers and judges actually had contact with each other outside the courtroom, and we were able to look into chambers from the hallway as we left the courtroom, and the judge beckoned me back into his chambers, and I was somewhat fearful because I had been informed by many that I had a habit in those days, and probably still do, of making various faces and grimaces while waiting for things to happen in a courtroom, and I thought I was going to be admonished for that lack of respect, and I tiptoed into the judge's chambers and found, much to my amazement, that he wanted to know whether I had thought that was a fair sentence. Well, that had never happened to me before, and it has never happened since, and I will never forget it. And he has ever since then, with all of us, demonstrated that kind of concern and that kind of willingness to listen even to the most lowly of us. And I think we owe him a debt for that and for all of his contributions. I think we owe his family a great debt for the time that we have taken from him and the citizens of this county have taken from him and from them. Judge, we will miss you as a judge, but we hope that we perhaps will see you as a colleague, and the people present here tonight and the Bar Association of Montgomery County would like to present you with a token of our respect and our deep affection and of our love. And we have a gift which you're free to open now or at your leisure, if you ever have any leisure. It's something that we don't think you'll have to pay as much attention to as you might have in the past, but we hope you will remember us when you do. It's inscribed with a plaque that reads something like this. This is to Judge David L. Cahoon, in grateful appreciation, Montgomery County Bar, with respect and affection of the Montgomery County Bar Association.
Howard, how do you open it?
Technical services, Steve. Steve, technical services.
Like one of the clerk's office files. Yeah. Oh. That's beautiful.
Oh, it's lovely. I'd like to say, I'll introduce him.
I give you our leisure suit expert. Well, I guess we've come to that point of the night which I hate, because this confirms the fact that Dave isn't going to hang around. I feel a little bit funny, and I told him this last week. He's from Brockton, and I was born in Malden. And we both like the Sockers and the Celtics and the Bruins. And I said to Dave, with you leaving and me moving into this job, I kind of feel like the guy who was tossed a glove and when Ted Williams retired and said, play left field. Of course, that was Carl Yastrzemski, I'll point out to you. With very mixed emotions, humbly and with great love from all of your friends here, David, your colleagues, please direct such remarks as you may choose to spread on the record.
Thank you. Judge Mitchell, I'm a stranger to these kinds of proceedings, and I asked him if I should prepare a statement like Judge Murphy does in the State of the Judiciary and read it up here. And Judge Mitchell said, no, do it off the back of the envelope. And I'm familiar with that because that's how Monsignor Costick gives his sermon. And so I got my envelope. That leads me to follow that format of the homily. And the lesson, I think, for today is from the letter of Jackie Gleason to the Philippians or the Thessalonians or somebody, but how sweet it is. But you know, true redemption only comes with a full confession. And so I have to come out of the closet. I'm a misfit. After winning the war for Generals Arnold and Marshall, as John told you, I went to the School of Foreign Service under the GI Bill. And the Veterans Administration had psychologists there that administered personality screening tests for career selection. And he concluded that since I believed in God, had concern for human beings, and preferred reading newspapers to the Latin classics, under no circumstances could I succeed in the practice of law. And my good friend of fond memory, Tom's father, Bob Heaney, said, Dave, the shrink is full of crap. Let's go to the law school. So I stayed on the public dole and went to the law school. And I earned my living practicing law out here, and passed a survival course with the Judicial Selections Commission and became a judge, or as some of them said, an ass in lion skin. I went on to the Judicial College and finished that, and came back, and I guess Judge Mathias saw the grades, and he said, would you be administrative judge? And I didn't ask for this, and I didn't seek it, and I didn't understand it, but I kind of figured that maybe he and Judge Murphy had gotten together on a damage control operation to reduce the number of trials that I would preside in. Well, loyalist that I am, I took the job and have been at it ever since. But I got even. I tried Bob Jake's case before against the bank, and they're still buffaloed with it. But this has been a very marvelous and an educational experience for me. And like all kindergarten kids, I want to tell you what I learned at school. But first, let me acknowledge my thanks to some of the people here tonight, and especially John O'Neill. I really appreciate what you've done in putting this show together, and I hope when you go out of here, you can have a smile on your face, distinct from your visage when you come before me on these motions for continuance. I appreciate the Lieutenant Governor being here, and Judge Mitchell for keeping the show moving. He couldn't control Judge McAuliffe, but that's been part of our life. I do thank you, John, seriously and profoundly. You've been a marvelous friend, a terrific mentor, and a source of strength and support for me in these endeavors. And Judge Murphy, I hope I've measured up for you. You have been very patient with me. I know that there were times when we didn't perceive the same goals, but you listened out, and we were able to give you conviction about what we were trying to do. And it's a measure of your greatness as the Chief Judge of this state. You know, a cadre of us went to Denver last year on a national conference on trial court delay and problems of that kind, and we heard about problems in the other jurisdictions. We came back convinced that Maryland is in pretty good shape. And it's due in a large measure to the leadership that Judge Murphy has presented. Charlie Gilchrist has been a very good friend over the years. He's been dedicated to the public interest of this county, and I appreciate all of his comments. I'm going to say what I said before a couple of weeks ago, because I think this is a different group. But somebody asked me when Charlie announced that he was going to leave the public service and go into the ministry, I want to know if I was surprised, and I said, no, he's just too decent a man to be in public office. And Tom and the Bar Association, this is a very cherished moment and a gift. Our relationships over the years have been different and diffused. I was very active with the association, 19 years of practice in the county, and we've had situations where I've had to put my concept of public duty ahead of some of the ideas of the bar, but we've been able to hammer it out. But as I said earlier, this has been a very marvelous educational experience for me. And I've come to learn something about two groups and an individual in the course of this that are the ones that I think ought really have the tributes tonight. And